I arrived at the grand hall just as the sun dipped behind the city skyline, casting long shadows across the marble steps. The wedding was in full swing, flowers spilling over every railing, crystal chandeliers shimmering above tables draped in ivory linens, laughter echoing from every corner. Yet, as I stepped through the ornate doors, a strange silence settled over me, as if I were a ghost drifting through a celebration that wasn't mine. My cousin's wedding was supposed to be a joyous occasion, a chance for family to gather and celebrate. But for me, it was something else entirely. I stood at the edge of the room, my presence unnoticed by the very people I called family. The familiar faces that once greeted me with warmth now glanced past me, their eyes glazed with preoccupation or polite dismissal. Years of shared birthdays, holidays, and late-night talks seemed to evaporate into thin air beneath the weight of their indifference. I wasn't invisible, not in the literal sense. I was there, standing among them, yet I might as well have been a shadow. My aunts and uncles, cousins and second cousins, all caught up in the whirlwind of celebration, passed me by without so much as a nod. The conversations I tried to join faltered and faded, as if my words were whispers swallowed by the room's din. I caught a glimpse of my mother across the room, her eyes briefly meeting mine before shifting away, preoccupied with a distant cousin's new engagement. Standing alone by the ornate staircase, I felt the sting of isolation prick at my skin. My heart clenched with a quiet ache that no amount of music or sparkling champagne could soothe. How had it come to this? After all the years of closeness, the shared secrets and family dinners, how had I become a mere blur in their collective memory? I scanned the room again, searching for any sign of recognition, any flicker of the familial bond that once tied us together. But the faces were turned away, absorbed in their own worlds. My presence was a background detail, a forgotten note in an otherwise harmonious symphony. As I watched my cousin, the groom, laughing effortlessly with his new in-laws, orchestrating his day with the ease of a man used to being the center of attention, a wave of bitterness washed over me. He had always been the golden child, the one whose accomplishments were celebrated and whose footsteps everyone eagerly followed. And here I was, standing on the sidelines, a spectator to his success and the adoration it commanded. Yet beneath the hurt, a different feeling stirred, a quiet resolve that refused to be extinguished. I reminded myself of the times I had felt overlooked before, the moments when my own achievements were met with silence or skepticism by those who should have been my biggest supporters. I thought of the evenings spent pouring my soul into my work, the sacrifices made in pursuit of a dream that felt distant from this room filled with familiar strangers. In that moment, I invited myself and those who might read my story to reflect on their own experiences of invisibility. How often had we been overlooked by those closest to us? How many times had our presence been reduced to a mere shadow, our worth questioned by the very people who should have stood beside us? The atmosphere around me buzzed with celebration, but inside, I wrestled with the ache of being unseen. I realized that this wasn't just my story of invisibility, it was a reflection of a universal human experience. We all crave acknowledgement, a moment when the people who matter most in our lives truly see us. As the evening unfolded, I remained on the periphery, observing the intricate dance of family dynamics. I noticed siblings exchanging subtle glances, old rivalries simmering beneath smiles, and unspoken grievances that lingered in the air like a fragile perfume. The wedding was more than a union of two people. It was a stage where years of love, resentment, pride, and jealousy played out in quiet gestures and fleeting expressions. Despite the void I felt, I chose not to retreat into bitterness. Instead, I stood tall, reminding myself that my value was not determined by the fleeting recognition of others. I had my own journey, my own battles, and my own victories that no one here could diminish. The evening wore on, and the room grew warmer with the glow of shared stories and clinking glasses. Yet, I remained a silent observer, a quiet presence on the edges of this family tableau. The celebration continued, but so did my quiet determination to forge my own path, one where recognition would come not from fleeting family approval, but from the undeniable truth of my own accomplishments. Walking through the crowd, I caught snippets of conversation, plans, dreams, and memories, but none seemed to include me. Still, I held on to a fragile hope that this night's invisibility was temporary, that one day, the walls of indifference would crumble, and my presence would be acknowledged not just as a relative, but as someone worthy of attention and respect. For now, I stood in the shadows of my cousin's bright day, invisible yet unbroken, waiting for the moment when the story would shift, and I would no longer be just a face in the crowd. The music swelled again, a rich melody weaving through the grand hall as laughter mingled with the clinking of glasses. I retreated toward a quiet corner, my gaze drifting over the crowd, tracing faces etched with years of shared history and unspoken tensions. The distance between us felt palpable, a chasm carved by misunderstandings and jealousy that had accumulated over time like dust on an untouched shelf. Our family had never been perfect. Beneath the glossy surface of celebration, there were fractures, old wounds that festered silently, kept alive by silence and avoidance. I remembered the arguments that erupted over trivial matters, the sideways glances exchanged at reunions, and the whispered rumors that often left me feeling like an outsider within my own bloodline. That night, as I observed the gathering, those memories surfaced unbidden. I recalled how my successes had been met with skepticism or outright dismissal by some relatives, while others seemed to thrive by casting shadows on my achievements. The jealousy was subtle but unmistakable, a cold undercurrent beneath warm smiles, a rivalry that had quietly grown over the years. My cousin, the groom, stood at the center of it all, exuding the confidence and charm that had always made him the family's favorite. His path had been different from mine, seemingly smoother, marked by accolades and recognition that were often broadcast louder than mine ever had been. He had risen to become the CEO of a prominent tech firm, a fact that seemed to amplify the pride in his posture and the subtle pride in his eyes. Watching him move through the crowd, shaking hands and accepting congratulations, I couldn't help but notice the way people deferred to him, the respect that followed him like a shadow. It was clear that his success was not just professional, but deeply entwined with the family's perception of worth. In their eyes, he was the embodiment of achievement, the shining example that reflected well on all of us. The contrast between us was stark. While he basked in the glow of shared admiration, I remained on the periphery, my own accomplishments hidden beneath layers of family politics and old rivalries. It was as if my journey had been a quiet undercurrent, unnoticed and unvalued in the larger narrative. But even as I wrestled with these feelings, I found myself admiring his poise. There was a grace to the way he handled himself, a certain ease that came from knowing he was the one everyone wanted to celebrate. I thought back to our childhood, to the times when we were inseparable, partners in mischief, confidants in moments of doubt. How had we drifted so far apart? The answer was tangled in years of choices and circumstances, in the ways we had each sought validation. For him, it had been the path of visible success, the corner office, the public accolades, the glossy magazine features. For me, it had been a quieter climb, one marked by steady progress and personal victories that rarely made headlines. As the evening progressed, I found myself quietly observing not just my cousin, but the subtle dance of family dynamics unfolding around him. There were conversations laced with pride and envy, alliances forged and broken with a glance. I noticed the way some relatives lingered a little longer by his side, eager to bask in reflected glory, while others avoided my gaze altogether. Amidst the swirling emotions, I began to understand that this was more than just a family gathering. It was a reflection of the power structures within our shared history. Success, in their eyes, was a currency that dictated status and attention. And in that economy, my value had been diminished, overshadowed by his towering presence. Still, beneath the surface, I sensed a deeper truth. Despite the jealousy and the distance, family ties were not easily severed. There was a complexity to our relationships, a blend of love and rivalry, admiration and resentment, that made the possibility of reconciliation both fragile and real. I thought about the moments when I had tried to bridge the gap, to reach out and remind them of who I was beyond the achievements and failures. How often had those attempts been met with polite nods or polite avoidance? The wounds ran deep, but so did the hope for understanding. As the night wore on, I caught glimpses of my cousin's pride, not just in his own accomplishments, but in the legacy we shared. There was a subtle pride in his demeanor that suggested he valued family, even if his ways of showing it were different from mine. It was a reminder that beneath the surface tensions, there was a foundation still waiting to be rebuilt. I found myself wondering what it would take for that foundation to hold again, to move beyond the misunderstandings and jealousy that had kept us apart. Could success be a bridge rather than a barrier? Could the achievements that separated us also be the key to reconnecting? The questions lingered as I watched the reception unfold. I saw my cousin raise a glass in a toast, his voice steady and warm as he spoke of love, family, and new beginnings. The room responded with applause, the air charged with celebration and hope. And yet, amidst the cheers, I remained a quiet observer, aware of the distance yet to be crossed. The wedding was a moment of triumph for him, a celebration of the life he had built. For me, it was a reminder of the journey ahead, a journey not just of professional success, but of healing and reclaiming the place I deserved within the family. I took a deep breath and stepped back into the crowd, resolved to navigate the complexities of family with patience and courage. The night was far from over, and the story was still unfolding. But as I watched the golden child of the family bask in his moment, I knew that my own moment would come, and when it did, it would demand attention in ways that could no longer be ignored. Just when I thought the night would slip away into the usual haze of polite conversations and unnoticed presence, the room shifted. The music softened, a hush settling over the guests as my cousin stepped onto the small stage set beside the grand fireplace. There was an unmistakable pause, a collective leaning in, as if everyone sensed that something unexpected was about to unfold. I watched him, poised and confident, the center of attention as always. But then, in a move that caught me utterly off guard, he lifted the microphone and looked directly in my direction. The chatter faded to silence, and all eyes slowly turned toward me. He cleared his throat and spoke with a clarity that cut through the soft murmurs. Before we continue, I want to take a moment to recognize someone very important in this room. Someone who many of you might not know holds a title that speaks volumes about dedication and success. My cousin, my name, is here tonight as the chief executive officer of their own company. The words hung in the air, electric and undeniable. The room shifted again, now with surprise, curiosity, and something like admiration. I felt a sudden flush rise to my cheeks as all eyes locked onto me. The quiet observer was thrust into the spotlight, the invisible made visible. For a moment, I was frozen, caught between disbelief and a surge of pride. Here, in front of the very people who had ignored me all evening, my cousin was publicly acknowledging my achievement. The same cousin whose shadow I had long lived in had just placed me center stage, a declaration that demanded recognition. The murmurs began, soft but growing, relatives whispering to one another, glancing my way with new interest. I saw surprise flicker in their eyes, some nodding in approval, others perhaps reevaluating their previous judgments. The golden child had just shifted the narrative, and the impact was palpable. I took a deep breath, steadying myself against the sudden rush of emotions. It was more than just the public announcement. It was the validation I had craved, the acknowledgement that my efforts had not gone unnoticed, at least not by one person who mattered enough to make this moment happen. My cousin's voice continued, steady and sincere. I know we haven't always seen eye to eye, and perhaps the paths we've chosen have taken us in different directions. But I've watched from afar as my name has built something remarkable, something that deserves our respect and admiration. Tonight, I want everyone here to recognize that success comes in many forms, and that family means standing up for one another. The applause began, hesitant at first, then swelling as others joined in. Faces that once looked past me now regarded me with curiosity and newfound respect. I felt a warmth spread through my chest, a mixture of relief and empowerment. The invisible thread that had tethered me to the margins was unraveling, replaced by a new connection forged in the light of recognition. As the applause died down, I stepped forward, my voice steady despite the pounding of my heart. "Thank you," I said, meeting my cousin's eyes with genuine gratitude. "It means more than I can express to hear those words tonight." The crowd shifted, some approaching me with congratulations, others offering tentative smiles. The atmosphere transformed from cold distance to cautious engagement. For the first time in years, I was not just present, I was acknowledged. In that moment, I realized the power of recognition not just for the ego, but for healing old wounds and opening doors that had long been closed. My cousin's unexpected announcement was more than a gesture, it was a catalyst, a turning point that challenged the family's perceptions and invited them to see me anew. The evening continued, but now the energy around me was different. Conversations that had previously skirted past me now sought my input. I found myself sharing stories of my company's growth, my challenges and victories welcomed rather than dismissed. The walls I had felt pressing in on me began to recede. Yet beneath the surface, I knew this was only the beginning. Recognition had sparked a shift, but true acceptance and understanding would require more than a single announcement. The dynamics that had shaped our family's interactions were complex and deeply rooted. Still, as I looked around the room, catching the eyes of relatives who had once ignored me, I felt a quiet satisfaction. The narrative was changing, and with it, the possibilities for connection and respect were expanding. My cousin returned to his seat, his expression a mixture of pride and relief. I felt an unspoken bond between us, a bridge mended in a moment of shared acknowledgement. It was a reminder that success was not a zero-sum game, that one person's achievements did not diminish another's, but could instead elevate us all. As the reception resumed its lively pace, I stood amidst my family, no longer invisible but seen. The night was far from over, and there were still conversations to be had, bridges to build. But for the first time in a long time, I felt the stirrings of something I had yearned for, a place where my achievements could be celebrated openly, where my presence mattered. And in that moment, under the glow of chandeliers and the warmth of unexpected recognition, I knew that the story was shifting. The family's gaze had turned toward me, and with it, the chance to rewrite the narrative that had long kept me in the shadows. The room's atmosphere shifted palpably after my cousin's announcement. The earlier buzz of distant conversations and polite avoidance gave way to a newfound warmth that spread steadily through the gathering. Relatives who had barely glanced my way before began approaching me with curious smiles and tentative questions, their expressions laced with a mix of surprise and genuine interest. Aunt Margot was the first to come over, her usual guarded demeanor softened by a spark of pride. "I had no idea, dear," she said quietly, glancing around as if to ensure no one overheard her. "You've built something remarkable. Tell me more about your company." Her words were small, but they opened a door I hadn't dared knock on in years. I found myself sharing snippets of my journey, the sleepless nights, the risks taken, and the hurdles overcome. With each story I told, the walls between us seemed to crumble a little more. The conversation flowed easily, a stark contrast to the cold silences that had defined our interactions for so long. As the evening unfolded, more family members gravitated toward me, drawn by the shift in perception. Cousins who once sidestepped my presence now engaged in earnest dialogue, asking about my work, my vision, and the challenges I had faced along the way. The very same people who had overlooked my achievements were now eager to understand them. In these moments, I realized that success, while often solitary in its pursuit, has the power to connect. It became a bridge, not just between me and my cousin, but between me and the wider family. I saw glimmers of respect replacing old doubts, and curiosity supplanting the jealousy that had once kept us apart. Yet, amid the newfound attention, I was careful not to mistake recognition for acceptance. I sensed beneath the surface a lingering hesitation, a wariness born from years of distance and unresolved tension. Rebuilding relationships would require more than just acknowledgement of my accomplishments. It demanded patience, empathy, and a willingness to confront the past. Later, as I stood by the banquet table, a distant cousin approached, her eyes bright with genuine interest. "I never realized how much you've achieved," she admitted. "It's inspiring." Maybe I should stop comparing myself and start focusing on my own path. Her confession resonated deeply. It reminded me that our family's dynamics had been shaped not only by rivalry, but by insecurity and fear of failure. The journey to mutual respect was as much about healing those wounds as it was about celebrating success. I took the opportunity to encourage openness, sharing my belief that our worth should not be measured by comparisons or competition, but by the courage to pursue our own dreams. The conversation lingered, a quiet exchange of vulnerability that hinted at the possibility of deeper connections. As the night progressed, the wedding reception transformed from a backdrop of exclusion into a space of tentative reconciliation. Family members began to share stories of their own struggles and triumphs, weaving a tapestry of experiences that revealed our common humanity beneath the surface differences. I found myself drawn into conversations about hopes and fears, about the challenges of balancing personal ambition with family expectations. For the first time in a long while, I felt seen, not just as a successful individual, but as a person with complexities and emotions worthy of understanding. The celebration continued with renewed energy, the clinking of glasses punctuated by laughter and heartfelt exchanges. The earlier division softened, replaced by a fragile but growing sense of unity. Before the evening drew to a close, I took a quiet moment to reflect on the journey that had brought me here. The recognition I had received was not merely a personal victory, it was a catalyst for change within the family, an invitation to rewrite old narratives and build new bridges. I understood that the path ahead would not be without challenges. Old habits and resentments would not disappear overnight, and the process of rebuilding trust required ongoing effort. But the night had planted seeds of possibility, seeds that could grow into lasting connection and genuine acceptance. As I looked around the room, catching the eyes of relatives who once dismissed me, I felt a renewed sense of hope. The wedding, which had begun as a scene of isolation, was now a stage for transformation, a moment when the family began to see me not just as a cousin, but as an accomplished individual deserving of respect and belonging. With a quiet smile, I stepped back into the swirl of celebration, ready to embrace the conversations and connections that lay ahead. The evening had shown me that success could indeed alter perceptions, but true acceptance required something deeper, a willingness to look beyond achievements and see the person beneath. And so, amid the fading music and the glow of shared stories, I resolved to nurture these new beginnings, knowing that the journey toward reconciliation was as meaningful as any accomplishment I had earned. Even now, as I look back on that evening, the mix of emotions still feels vivid, the sting of being overlooked, the shock of public recognition, and the tentative hope that followed. The wedding was a crucible of contrasting experiences, pain and pride, invisibility and validation, distance and connection. It was a bittersweet reminder of how complex family dynamics can be, especially when success enters the equation. For years, I had wrestled with the feeling of being invisible to those who should have known me best. The silence from family members, the sidelong glances, and the unspoken judgments shaped a narrative I struggled to rewrite. That night, my cousin's announcement broke through that silence, offering a rare moment of affirmation that resonated far beyond the walls of the reception hall. It was a lesson in the unpredictable ways recognition can come, sometimes unexpectedly, from the very people who once ignored us. His words didn't just acknowledge my professional achievements, they challenged the family's long-held perceptions and opened a door I hadn't dared to knock on for a long time. Yet, the experience also underscored a deeper truth. Validation from others, while powerful, is not the foundation of self-worth. I had spent too many years seeking approval in places that never truly valued me, forgetting that my own belief in myself was the most vital recognition of all. That night taught me to hold on to my achievements, not as trophies to brandish, but as reminders of resilience and determination. Success, I realized, isn't solely about how loudly it's celebrated or who acknowledges it first. It's about the quiet victories that build character and the inner strength that sustains us through moments of doubt. I encourage anyone who has ever felt overlooked or underestimated to remember this. Your journey matters, even if it goes unseen by those around you. Sometimes it takes only one moment, A single acknowledgement, a heartfelt word, or an unexpected gesture to shift the way those closest to us see who we truly are. But more importantly, hold fast to your own sense of worth. Let your achievements be a source of confidence, not a currency for acceptance. The people who truly matter will come to see you not just for what you do, but for who you are. That evening at my cousin's wedding was a turning point, a reminder that recognition can come in surprising ways and that sometimes the most profound validation begins within. It was the moment when I stopped waiting for approval and started embracing my own story, with all its complexities and triumphs. In the end, the greatest revenge against those who underestimate us isn't to prove them wrong loudly or vindicatively, but to live a life so authentic and successful that their misjudgments become irrelevant. It's about creating a system, whether within family, work, or personal relationships, that values real contributions and fosters genuine respect. As I stood there that night, surrounded by family who were just beginning to see me in a new light, I realized that true success isn't measured by titles or accolades alone. It's about forging connections, healing old wounds, and building an environment where everyone's worth is acknowledged. The story is far from over, but that moment was a milestone. It marked the start of a new chapter, one where I no longer felt invisible, but seen, not just as a cousin, but as a person who had earned her place in the family and the world. And with that realization came a profound sense of peace, the quiet confidence that no matter what lay ahead, I was ready to face it on my own terms. If you loved the story, like the video and subscribe.